Hi, all. This is Ignite Donuts Podcast, Episode 4. Today, we'll be interviewing a very special guest, Alan Fitzpatrick. He's a professor at CMU, and he has a lot of great insights about entrepreneurship. So let's dive right into the interview. All right, well, let's get started with the first question, which is, can you tell our viewers a little bit about your background and kind of what you do and your background with entrepreneurship?
Sure. So as Casey said, one of my functions is I am an adjunct professor, and I'm teaching entrepreneurship courses both at Central Michigan University and at Johnson and Wales University in Charlotte. And I've been teaching entrepreneurship courses for a number of years. Entrepreneurship is a passion of mine and something that I have done myself. So I am a three-time entrepreneur. I've started a couple of software companies. I'm sure we'll talk about these as we go. And then currently have an internet service provider company that provides high-speed internet directly to end users. Most of my career before becoming an entrepreneur was in the telecommunications industry. So when I got out of college, I went and got a job, and I worked in the field for a number of years. Paid off my student loans,
Right.
Got some good experience, and then I became an entrepreneur later in life.
Okay.
So that's sort of my background, a later in life entrepreneur with industry experience, and I've done 3 startups now.
Hey, that's great. It's never too late, right? To get into the entrepreneurship realm.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. How did that all end up in you becoming an adjunct professor?
Sure. So I had been working in my second startup. It was a company called MailView, which was a video messaging application, and it had a self-destructing video messaging feature. We were actually out before Snapchat. We just never became as big as Snapchat did, but it was sort of in that space. So we were in a competition, a startup competition in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we made it to the finals. And one of the mentors that was appointed to us to get us through the final pitch was Jeff Thomas. So Jeff Thomas, you know now, is the head of the Masters of Entrepreneurship in Central Michigan. So he was one of our mentors, and at the time, he eventually became the head of the business department at Johnson and Wales in Charlotte, and he had obviously been working with me on pitching our service and our company. And he said, Alan, you're a really good presenter, and you know what you're talking about. Would you ever consider sharing your experiences in the classroom and being an adjunct professor and teaching entrepreneurship? So I got suckered in, if you will, but it was a passion of mine, so I had fun doing it. And then I just kept doing it. So each year I've been teaching classes. In undergraduate, I teach pitching and planning, so writing your business plan and pitching it. I've taught creating and launching new ventures, which takes you past the plan and gets you to the point now where you are forming your company, you're forming your LLC or your S Corp, you're hiring employees or contractors, you are starting to protect your intellectual property. So it sort of takes it to that next level. And I still teach that class as well. I've taught a financing new ventures course where we talk about raising money, whether it's crowdfunding or angel investing or venture capital. And then at Central Michigan, I've taught undergraduate in marketing, marketing for entrepreneurs, and then the graduate level course in technology for entrepreneurs, which is, of course, how we met. So what I love about the technology for entrepreneurs course is it marries 2 passions of mine. One is I'm a technology guy. The second thing is I'm an entrepreneur. So this is a really good dovetail of how do startups today leverage technology to lower their costs, get to market, and compete in the marketplace.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting because how Chris and I see it, we're actually all in 3 different stages because Chris is in the undergraduate program, I'm in the graduate program, and then obviously you're a professor. And so I'm sure that there's got to be a difference from presenting and doing business competitions from a student perspective, and then on the other side being a professor. How's that, I guess, that change of like you actually are you once were providing the material to potential investors and other organizations, now you're educating that material onto students?
Probably the biggest change is bringing the real world stories and the real world experiences in. So it's similar to in our class, I try to interject some things from time to time about open broadband and what we're doing and things that have happened to us. So in all my classes, I haven't done it quite so much in the master's class, but in the undergraduate classes, I'll share examples of here's the non-compete agreement that we have our new employees sign. Here is the operating agreement that Open Broadband wrote for being an LLC. Here is a situation that we got into with a vendor where they violated one of the terms of the contract. So we talk about contracts and leases in one of my classes. So is bringing those stories and those examples into the classroom. It's sometimes difficult as a student because some students don't really have a business. Some like yourself do, but others are just doing it from a theoretical standpoint. They want to learn how to start a business and kind of what's involved, but they don't really have a business. And what I try to do is get them thinking that, yes, you can start a business. And these are things you need to do. And this is what really happens. And it's not always as easy as what you read about. And things are hard. And you run into issues. And you need to be prepared for them. So I try to bring those stories in.
Yeah. No, I can, both Chris and I can attest to that because we work with students. Obviously, we're not professors, but with working with students and just managers in the CMU community, we have a lot of different mentoring roles, and so we're always using examples to teach lessons. So I can definitely relate with that, and I appreciate it when you share some stories because I can theoretically think about your situation of how you dealt with it in similar ways of how we dealt with similar situations. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, while we're on the topic of using examples to teach and teaching, what's some of the, so you've obviously owned a few businesses, you've started a lot of businesses. What are some of the common issues that occur for new businesses, for businesses that are starting, and maybe some things that students should look out for?
Sure. So the first thing I would always say is make sure you're solving a real problem that people have. A lot of times people just have an idea and they think it's a great idea and they think the market will be receptive to it. And they'll start to spend a lot of time and energy and money on it. But at the end of the day, most new ideas are really bad. It's just
It's true. It's true.
And it's hard to say that to a young person who's starting a business or wants to start a business because you're dashing their dreams, right? You're throwing water on their dreams. So I think the sooner we can get people to understand you need to solve a real problem and have a real customer that's willing to pay you to solve that problem, the better. It's better for everybody. So sometimes it's hard for some people to think in terms of their startup solving a problem. Even if it's like a restaurant business or a coffee shop, people say, hey, I'm selling coffee. What problem am I solving? And I try to get people to focus in on, yes, you are solving the problem. Let's talk about what problem you're solving. Are you solving that quick, I need some caffeine, on the way to work problem? And what you have to offer in that scenario is a drive-through. Because it's got to be quick. You got to be located in a place that's en route to a school or work locations. Or are you solving the problem of having a great cup of coffee where people are going to sit down and spend half an hour and have a meeting with someone? That's a completely different environment. You don't need a drive-through for the latter. You need a nice, warm, inviting location, and you need high quality coffee, probably higher quality than the first example.
Right.
And you can charge more for it. This is $4.50 pour over coffee versus the $1.50 that you get through the drive-through. So I try to talk about each example as you're trying to solve a problem for a customer and understanding who that customer is and how many of them are there, and why would they buy from you versus somebody else. And the more you can get people thinking about that, I think the better start people are going to have, because startups are hard. They're really hard.
Right.
If you're not solving the problem for somebody, just makes it even harder.
Right. Well, I think solving a problem too kind of guides you, like you're saying. Like if you're just going to open a coffee shop, you have no problem to solve. You're just kind of guessing what's the right thing to do. But if you know there's a problem, you can make your business to solve that problem. So it's almost a roadmap for you as you get out of the ideation phase. So
Oh, it sure is. And I have the same example with restaurants. So I'll have students that want to open up a restaurant, and I'm like, well, what problem are you solving? And they're like, well, I'm serving food. So let's peel back the onion a little bit. Are you solving the problem of people are having an anniversary dinner, or they're having a wedding rehearsal dinner, and that's what you're serving? If that's a completely different answer to you're solving the problem for a college student that wants a $5 meal in between classes.
Right, right.
So you have to kind of think about who your target audience is and what problem you're really solving. And this whole COVID-19 situation that we have now is opening up. Obviously, it's a big problem for existing restaurants that were relying on people coming in and sitting down. But it's also opening up an opportunity for restaurants that are starting to transition their business model. And yes, using technology to take online orders, do online delivery, pickup, change your whole business model and still thrive as a restaurant, but operate differently than the traditional model of people coming in and sitting down.
Yeah, definitely. I have two thoughts on that. One, a little story from our business with problem solving or identifying the problem was it took us a long time and a lot of mentorship from Jeff Thomas actually to figure out what our problem was that we were solving. It kind of took its course, and throughout time we finally figured out what it was. But our original, I remember talking to Jeff at one of the new venture competition workshops we had, and in like the very initial months of us wanting to start this donut business idea, and he asked us what problem are we solving, and I said that we are solving that there's a lack of quality food in Mount Pleasant, and which is kind of it's very broad. It's not necessarily it's not really identifying a problem. If it was a really big problem, people wouldn't be eating every day, and people still do eat every day in Mount Pleasant, whether it's a fast food chain restaurant or a little bit higher class one. So we then pivoted after time. We pivoted and we figured out what our problem was, is that there's not enough late night snack options for students. And then that was a problem that we identified. And since actually putting our product into market, we've realized that our product also offers a solution for that. So that's how we kind of learned that. And as you said, with the COVID-19 situation, businesses, if they want to survive, they need to pivot, and they need to pivot their solutions and their problems, because the problems are pivoting themselves. So they need to pivot to their customers, and because customers will always have a demand for restaurants to some extent, at least in our lifetime, I believe. So it is interesting how businesses are adopting different models right now, and I know that a lot of businesses are learning as you go, but I mean, that's the great journey of entrepreneurship, is learning and being guided on the step-by-step process. So
you're absolutely right. It never ends. It's always a journey. You're always learning and adapting.
Yeah. And then in regards to the current health crisis that we're in right now, that we're all living in, I mean, there's every year that there's always going to be entrepreneurs. So what do you think, and specifically speaking to like the technology background that you do have, if an entrepreneur wants to start something on a online or app-based platform, the market is saturated to some extent. So how do you think that entrepreneurs will create the new TikTok or the new Snapchat, or it might not be a social media platform. It could be a data or cloud computing platform. But how do you think entrepreneurs will use this, I guess, virtual jump, so to speak, because more businesses will be turning into the virtual world right now because of the crisis that we're in? How do you think entrepreneurs will be working around the saturation that the market is seeing right now within the online world, if that makes sense?
Sure. Well, I always recommend starting off with a customer, because the customer is going to guide you into exactly what you need to do. Hopefully you're picking a customer and there's a whole lot more like them. It's not just a one-off. But if you can start with a customer or a small customer group and start to build a product around them, then you can expand it as you go. Uh, in today's world, you're going to have to be online. You're going to have to be digital. You're going to have to do something different. I think you're absolutely right. One challenge of the online world is commoditization. If you think of it, buying from Amazon, is it really any different than buying from Walmart.com or buying from some other website online? It's really hard for a lot of the users to tell a difference, right? Other than pre-shipping, right? And how fast, what's in inventory and so forth. So I would see an entrepreneur in this commoditized world having to be more niche. If you can become a niche and own that particular category, you're going to be probably too small for the Walmarts and the Amazons to really worry about initially. And you can grow and establish a reputation and then grow from there. Like, for example, maybe you want to be the world's best supply of baseball hats. And I say that only because I'm looking at your background right now. But let's say you have the most extensive supply of baseball hats, and you have different sizes, and you've got the kind that are adjustable and the kind that aren't, and you've got like every major college and pro and high school team, and just have some niche where people want to buy a ball cap. That's where they go. You wouldn't go to Amazon.com and just search. I mean, you can get a ball cap on Amazon, but it's not like the target niche for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that may sound like an extreme example, but I would suggest that entrepreneurs, find a customer with a particular issue, try to create a niche where you're like the best provider in that niche, whatever that niche is. Maybe the niche is donuts. Maybe the niche is hats. Maybe the niche is we sell sports trading cards. And we have like every hockey card and football card and baseball card, that has ever been produced in the US. And you have an online presence where you are just the sports card king. Focusing on niches like that, I think, are where it's at.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of a question I was thinking about earlier today. We're hearing a lot of kind of negative things in the news, and there's kind of a negative feeling just around everything right now. And I was wondering if you thought it's a good idea for a young person or a person of any age to pursue a new venture idea right now, given the current situation.
My answer is yes. It is a good time. Some of the most successful companies have actually been formed during downturns.
Right.
I think you just have to be careful, though, that you're targeting something that is in demand. There are things that are really taking off right now with this COVID situation. I mean, whenever you read something that's terrible, right? Everything is bad and companies are shutting down and people are out of work. You always hear all the negative. If you take a look at Netflix, what has happened with Netflix over the past 6 weeks?
Right. Or even an internet service provider. That's important now than it ever has been.
You're exactly right. At Open Broadband, our sales have increased dramatically the past couple of months. We have more customer orders. We have people that are asking for faster speeds, and it's all because people are having to work from home. Sometimes, the parents may have been working at the office, and when they come home, they're really just using the internet for entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So they could get by with a slower connection. But when both of them have to work from home, and they're running over VPNs, and they have the kids at home, and the kids are trying to take their schoolwork, you need a lot more bandwidth. So thanks, Chris, for teeing that up. Internet service providers have really benefited from this environment. Another one has been Amazon. If you take a look at what Amazon sales have been, they've just gone through the roof. I mean, they've always been popular, of course, but why? Because not as many people are going out to the store. They're ordering for delivery.
Mm-hmm.
Take a look at other delivery companies like Postmates or DoorDash. I don't know if you have any in Mount Pleasant, but you're familiar with the meal delivery companies. Their business has taken off because of the same thing. Restaurants can't have people come in, so people still need to eat. So you guys were dead on. Eating is never going to go away.
Right.
And I have this philosophy that people are inherently lazy. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but lazy from the standpoint of people want something done for them. They want their yard mowed for them. They want the food prepared for them. They want stuff done for them. People don't really want to make things anymore, at least not that many people. So if you focus your business, kind of circling back to your question here, Chris, even in a time like today, if you focus your new business on solving that problem for people where you're giving them what they want, you're doing it for them, you're bringing it right to their door, then you can be successful, even in the world like today.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. It's interesting. You talk about DoorDash. I actually looked into being what they call a Shift shopper. So Shift is one of these startup companies. Basically, you go to the grocery store and shop for people and then deliver their groceries to their door. And I can imagine that company has grown tremendously in the last few weeks. So even if things are bad, there's companies that are much better off, and then there's others. But I think it's also learning to pivot and adapt. So thank you. Yeah.
I think it's interesting too. I don't know if it was in one of my classes that I was learning about the delivery service, but I was looking through the evolution of just how grocery stores evolved into supermarkets and then to farmers markets and just diversified. But I believe that grocery stores actually started off with like a home delivery service. I mean, you had the cartons of milk that would or I guess the glass bottles of milk.
The milkman.
The milkman would deliver. And so it's kind of come back full circle, but this time it's a third party doing it. It's not necessarily the grocery store. So it's always intriguing to look at our history and look where we come from and see how history kind of, it doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes though, you know, so it has a little bit, it has similar qualities of the past. And now, Alan, I'm curious about, because you have a little bit more of a insider's insight on the internet since you operate an internet company. So what do you think, do you think the internet will evolve? Because obviously the third-party players are evolving the internet, but do you think the internet will ever form into something else? I guess. I don't know for a clear example is like the game console industry changed and evolved into a virtual reality industry as well. I mean, it diversified the market. And so Chris has a little bit of experience on that side. And so I'm just always curious to see what's the future like. What is, I guess, 5G, so to speak? I know we briefly mentioned it last class, but what is the future of the internet?
Oh, absolutely. It's constant change, just like any other industry. What you're seeing is a continued increase in speed and capacity. Yeah. I want less internet capacity, said no one. Yeah, no one has ever said that. Everybody wants faster, right? You don't want data caps. You don't want overage fees. You want gigabit service to your home. Mm-hmm. If you look historically at how much data usage is coming from a residence or a business, it's doubling like every 3 years. And a lot of it is driven by video. I mean, we didn't have things like YouTube, 4K video streaming, up until a couple of years ago. Now they're going to 8K video streaming. So the more the internet backbone and capacity increases, the more the applications that ride over top of it are going to take advantage of it. Virtual reality is a good one, because that's going to require up to 500 megabits per second to have a really good streaming virtual reality connection. Mm. How many people in the US have a 500 megabit connection?
Not
very few.
Some people still use dial-up. I mean, there's some people who still use dial-up. So
that's right, and those are the areas that my company is going in and providing faster service. But less than 3% of the country has gigabit speed today. So I think we're going to see a continued increase in getting faster and faster speeds to more and more people across the whole country. 5G is one of the technologies that is rolling out from a cellular perspective. What some people don't know is 5G stands for fifth generation. Fifth generation is a marketing term. It's the
right.
fifth generation of cellular. What does fifth generation mean?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of means whatever the cell phone companies want it to mean. whatever Verizon considers their 5th generation, whatever AT&T considers. Which is really weird because everything you read in the press, and Casey, I'm going to talk about this on tomorrow night's WebEx.
Yeah.
Everything you read is like, oh, 5G means gigabit speed. No, it doesn't. 5G is 5th generation. Now, the speed, when people talk about things like getting gigabit connection on your phone, that means they're using a particular radio frequency. And that radio frequency is capable of delivering certain speeds. Well, that radio frequency wasn't invented. I mean, that radio frequency already existed. It's just the cell companies weren't using it. And those radio frequencies have their pros and their cons. Like, for example, the gigabit speed wireless connection doesn't go through walls or trees. So if you're on your phone, you better like be line of sight with the tower if you're going to get that speed. Otherwise, you're not. If you're sitting in your car, you're not going to get that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of hype.
Interesting. You probably know more about this than me, but I believe like T-Mobile's 5G works in a completely different way than like the other cell companies' 5G. Like, I think T-Mobile's trying to do like nationwide 5G, where the other companies are doing it in like street corners in cities. And I think it's because what you're saying, they're using completely different technology to try to gain speed. I don't know. I'm sure you know more than that than I do, but.
Right, they're using different radio frequencies. So T-Mobile's using something that's a little wider spread. The companies that are doing these radio antennas every 200 or 300 feet in the city, they're trying to get you the gigabit speed.
Okay.
And by the way, it only goes like 200 or 300 feet.
Wow.
You get beyond that, you can't get it. They don't tell you that in the advertising.
Right.
But so I think kind of circling back to Casey's question, we're going to continue to see the internet evolve with more capacity and faster speeds. Mobile is certainly not going away. I mean, there's the place for fixed connections at your room, your apartment, your building, but there's also the need for mobile, and that's not going anywhere. On the social networking aspects, I can foresee more and more niche sites. So I like Casey's example of the rhyming. Maybe we're not repeating the past, but we're certainly rhyming. Years ago, a lot of people thought AOL was the internet.
Right.
People would go to AOL, and that's where they connected with people, and that's where they got their mail, and that's where they did searches. Everything. My parents thought AOL was the internet. It's like, no, that's just a website on the internet. There are people now that almost think Facebook is the internet. And I've had some students that, they think of setting up their website as a Facebook page. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, you can have a business as a Facebook page, but that's just, that's not like a real website. You're using somebody else's. So now you're seeing things like nextdoor.com, which I think has been really effective. If you guys haven't checked out nextdoor.com, it is a social media site for neighborhoods.
Interesting.
So they're taking this, sort of Facebook, social concept, and they're limiting it down to people that live in just certain neighborhoods. And you cannot get access unless you live in that neighborhood.
Interesting.
Wow.
So it's exclusive. So the first thought you might have is, why would anybody want a neighborhood Facebook? If you will? People use it all the time. People say, hey, did you see that the road was closed down the street? Does anybody know when it's going to open? Hey, I heard there was a fire at the restaurant down the street. Does anybody? And it was like neighbors communicating back and forth. Hey, our garbage didn't get picked up, yet. Are they late? Did your garbage get picked up? It's like neighbors talking with each other, and it's really, really popular. But I could see more and more like niche sites like that where gamers are talking to other gamers. You're not going to do that necessarily on Facebook. You might have a Facebook group, but
no.
I could see there being a whole separate site for people that just focus on that.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that being very popular because although people use Facebook, I know for a fact one of the Facebook sites I go on the most is called Friends of Dexter, and it's basically that only people in Dexter, my town, can get into it. Although we can connect with people all around the world, we like to connect to people right around us in the geographic area. So that's very interesting.
And if you think of it again, coming full circle almost, Facebook started off as being for college students, just to talk to other college students.
Yeah.
I have the next question, don't I? Ooh. So, yeah, what impact do you think technology will have on our society for the future? Do you think it's going to have permeate our society even more, or do you think where we're at is kind of where we're going to stay?
Even more. Yeah, I don't see it slowing down. And even some of the changes that we're seeing now with COVID-19, when things get back to quote unquote normal, we're still going to have a lot of these changes. They're going to continue on. Like, for example, there were some businesses that didn't like their workers working from home.
Right.
They were just afraid. They were afraid that you couldn't supervise people, that they were going to goof off, they were going to sleep in, they weren't going to be working, and by golly, we're going to have our employees come to the office. Now they can't do that. Now a lot of people work from home. But what I think is going to happen is the management is going to see that, wait a minute, we didn't lose productivity. In fact, people may have worked harder because they were at home and they never got off the clock. They kept working in the evening and they kept working on the weekend, and there was nothing to fear. So when people can go back to the office, it wouldn't surprise me at all if some of the companies go, wait a minute, this was a pretty good thing. Why don't we have more work from home?
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean? Well, everybody has to have faster bandwidth at their house,
right?
Yeah,
which is good for internet service providers. And that's going to beef up the need for security. So cybersecurity is going to become more and more important. So if you're not in the office, you got to really protect that transmission of confidential data.
Right. Interesting. Do you think the handshake is going to die? That's the real question.
Unsure on that one. I think there'll still be some handshakes, but
good. I kind of like the handshake, so
maybe less than before. I think that people may be more receptive to Zoom meetings, right, as opposed to always in-person meetings. There were a lot of people that just assumed that, hey, if we have a serious meeting, it needs to be face-to-face. Why would we use technology? But once people find out that, hey, there's nothing wrong with technology, and it saves everybody a lot of time, let's do this more often. Healthcare. You can do telepresence visits with your doctor now. In fact, they're kind of forcing you to, where you get on a video chat like this with the doctor. And once we get back to the normal world, I think you're going to see a lot of hospitals and doctor offices go, hey, for anything that's just kind of basic, we don't want you coming in because that ties us up and it's costly, and let's just do a video chat.
Mm-hmm.
So I think some of these changes are going to be permanent. Now that people see how easy this online experience is, they'll continue it. For some of the restaurants or coffee shops or grocery stores that kind of get into this delivery business, they might find that, hey, people kind of like delivery. People like having this stuff show up at their door.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to continue this go forward. And we need to make sure we have an easy way for people to order. We need to have a mobile app that people can order their goods, or at least a good e-commerce system for that to happen. And we need to have the people in the vans that can deliver the product. And we need to be able to track where everything is and confirm the quality and all of that. So long answer, but yeah, I think it's just going to continue to permeate society.
Absolutely. And I people say, oh, when we go back to normal, but I think a lot of things are going to change after this whole current thing. So many industries, I think, are changed forever, maybe for the better. I think a lot of them probably for the better. So,
yeah, the closest thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I would say the closest thing I can think of was 9/11, where there were some drastic changes to the airline industry afterwards for security purposes and things that we all have to do now. You may not even remember. You may not have been involved with air traffic before 9/11, but it used to be a lot easier for anybody just to walk in the airport, walk all the way down to the departure gate and say goodbye to your loved one as they were getting on the gate. You used to be able to do that. But 9/11 changed all that. And I think some of the changes we're seeing now are going to be permanent.
Very interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't have as much experience in this world as you do. So it'll be cool to see how, we as entrepreneurs, all of us are getting impacted, and see how we can survive during this. So, and I guess for the better, evolve too. And Alan, we don't want to take up too much of your time. We appreciate all your insights that you have right now that you've given us over the past half an hour. I just have one last question for you. It's in regards to big companies like Amazon who are already established in the I guess the e-commerce world. How can small niche businesses, going back to our earlier discussion, how can they actually compete with Amazon? Or I know that a lot has to do with the consumer demand, but the one good aspect, one of the many good aspects of Amazon is that what they do is they're consumer obsessive. So how can a small business that wants to do an e-commerce marketplace like Amazon, how can they enter into the market? Because in a way, I mean, Amazon is feared startups don't even try to start a marketplace business like Amazon, just because Amazon owns everything practically. So do you think entrepreneurs should go that route if they can find a specific problem and solve it? Or do you think that entrepreneurs should stay away from that business model that Amazon's just dominating and focus on something else?
I wouldn't recommend going head to head against Amazon, and I'm sure you wouldn't either. Obviously, starting with a niche of what area you are really, really good at and just stick to your niche. I would recommend focusing actually more on the services side than the product side. What Amazon is really, really good is getting you this widget to your door. They don't really have services, and they're not like baking food for you. Or they're not making donuts, right? They're not mowing your yard. They're not doing the service. They're just delivering a product to you. So let's say your niche was fly fishing, and you want to sell flies, and you want to sell fly rods. Okay, you can buy flies and fly rods on Amazon. So you're not going to go head to head against them just from a product perspective, but let's look at it from a service perspective. Let's say you are an avid fly fisherman in Michigan, and you know all the best spots. What if you had a service like a travel guide, and that once a month, twice a month, you take a group out fly fishing, and you're like their guide, and you have information about the fish and where you're going and the time of year and the type of fly, and you have all the technical knowledge of this, and you take the group out, and you have a website that's dedicated to fly fishing, and you write blog articles and they talk about different techniques and different things, and you become the expert at fly fishing. And you're going to have this core audience of fly. Now, there's not millions and millions of people that do this, but there's a significant number of people that do. Own that audience, own that niche, provide this service that goes along with the product. Amazon can't touch you. How would Amazon ever compete with you?
Yeah, that's
so
interesting.
Fly rod, but that's it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Alan, I think we only have about 40 seconds left on the Zoom call before it kicks us out. So we appreciate your insights, and I'm hoping that viewers can take a couple lessons from your experience within the entrepreneurship world. And so thank you for being on today's show and being our first guest ever. So we do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. Have a good rest of your day.
Yep. Thank you. You too.